In the Imperium, death is no end, only another duty. When a humble clerk is ordered to oversee a funeral on Terra, he discovers what it truly means to mourn in a realm where even the dead must still serve. The summons came sealed in black wax stamped with the aquila. I had never seen one before. Most clerks in the administratum retire or die at their desks, their remains fed to the reclamation units without ceremony. But the order was clear. Attendant Kalen Voss, Sector Archive 992G, report to the Basilica Mortis at the 17th hour for Imperial funeral rite coordination. It should have been an honor. Instead, it felt like a sentence. The corridors of the hive were unusually silent as I made my way toward the lifts. Even the drones that scoured the passageways for dust seemed to move slower, as if the building itself understood where I was going. I passed workers who averted their eyes, muttering the old prayers for protection from ill omen. On Terra, death wasn't rare, it was constant, but an imperial funeral was something else entirely. Such ceremonies were reserved for those whose service had touched the emperor's will in some inscrutable way. It was said only 1 in 10 million souls received such rites. I could not imagine what mistake had led them to choose me to witness one. The Basilica Mortis stood at the edge of the Sanctum district, a structure older than memory itself, its spires wrapped in a constant haze of incense and exhaust from the pyre towers above. The sky was little more than a dull red wound, pulsing faintly with reflected light from the city below. Custodian banners hung limp in the heatless wind, their golden threads glinting faintly like veins of sunlight trapped in dust. I had seen the place once before from afar. It had looked majestic then. Up close it felt hungry. A figure waited at the gate, a woman in the black vestments of the Mortis choir. Her face was pale beneath the cowl, eyes rimmed in red from lack of sleep or endless weeping, I could not tell which. "You are the attendant," she said, voice soft but hollow, as though she had long ago forgotten what warmth sounded like. "You will observe, record, and seal the rites. You will not speak during the service." She turned before I could respond, the hem of her robe whispering across the marble like a serpent in dry leaves. Inside, the air was thick with incense so potent it burned the back of my throat. Vast murals covered the walls, depictions of saints, martyrs, and forgotten heroes rendered in fading gold leaf. Yet even those sacred images seemed muted under the shadow of what dominated the central nave. A sarcophagus wrought entirely from black adamant, its surface alive with slow, crawling sigils that flickered like dying embers. A ring of robed priests circled it, chanting in low tones that set my teeth on edge. Above them hung hundreds of small reliquaries, each containing something unrecognizable: bones, augmetic eyes, strips of skin marked with script. The chorus of whispered prayer from those relics was faint but ceaseless, as though the dead themselves could not stop speaking. The Mortis choirwoman led me to a small alcove overlooking the chamber. "You will record from here," she said, handing me a data slate inscribed with seals of purity. "The deceased will be brought in soon. When the rite begins, you will document all occurrences faithfully." Her gaze lingered on me for a moment longer than was comfortable. It is not for mortal minds to interpret what they witness here, only to record it. Then she was gone, swallowed by the rising smoke. I stared down into the nave as the doors at the far end opened. A procession entered, 6 pallbearers clad in armor the color of burnt ivory, their faces hidden behind mirrored visors. Between them they bore a bier covered in cloth embroidered with the sigil of the Inquisition. My heart stuttered. Whoever lay beneath that shroud had been powerful indeed. The priests bowed as the procession passed, their voices rising into a keening chant that made the air vibrate with resonance. I expected grief, or at least solemn reverence, but what filled the basilica was something else: terror. The priests' voices cracked with it, their eyes wide as though they sang not for the dead but for mercy. The pallbearers reached the sarcophagus and set the bier down. The lead priest stepped forward, his mask carved in the likeness of a skull crowned with circuitry. He raised his staff, and the chant shifted into binary liturgy. The machine spirits of the basilica stirred in response, humming like 1,000 faint heartbeats merging into one. The great adamant sarcophagus began to open, its panels unfolding with the slow inevitability of a tomb unsealing itself. The corpse beneath the shroud was revealed in stages, first the pale hand, still clutching a golden rosarius, then the face, waxen and serene, the skin stretched thin over augmetic implants. Recognition struck me like a blow. I had seen that face 1,000 times etched onto purity seals, stamped across decrees, even in the background of official broadcasts. Lord Inquisitor Varian Holt. The air itself seemed to flinch. Holt's name was legend. He had purged demon worlds, uncovered heresies so vast they'd rewritten planetary histories. For a moment, I wondered if his death had been natural or if something darker had claimed him. Then the realization came: a man like that would not simply die. The priests began the rites of extraction. Silver rods descended from the ceiling, crackling with energy, positioning themselves over the corpse's head, chest, and heart. The chant grew louder, words merging into a unified roar that made my skull ache. The rods struck in unison, piercing flesh and bone with a sound like glass breaking underwater. Light poured out of the body. No, not light, something denser, heavier, as though the soul itself resisted leaving. The basilica shook. The incense smoke turned crimson, the murals pulsing as if alive. I pressed myself against the cold stone railing, heart hammering. Around me, servitors moved with mechanical precision, collecting the escaping energy in crystalline vessels that glowed brighter with each passing second. One shattered under the strain, flooding the alcove with a sound that was not a sound at all, a scream that bypassed the ears and sank straight into the mind. The choirwoman appeared beside me again, her eyes reflecting the red glow. "Do not look away," she whispered. "He resists, they always do." Below, Holt's body convulsed. His mouth opened in a silent cry, and for an instant I swore I saw his eyes move, not in death throes but in awareness. The priests continued their work, their chants now desperate. The soul light dimmed, drawn toward the crystalline matrix above the sarcophagus, coalescing into a sphere that pulsed faintly like a dying star. Then suddenly it was over. The body lay still, the glow subsided, the rods withdrew. One by one the priests collapsed, drained to near death. The choirwoman knelt, lifting one of the crystal vessels. Inside it, Holt's essence shimmered faintly. "For the Emperor," she intoned, voice trembling, "for eternity." I should have felt reverence. Instead, I felt horror. The energy within that crystal still moved, still tried to escape. And for the first time, I understood why no one on Terra ever truly rested, not even the dead. But before I could think further, a sound echoed from the far corridor, metal on stone, deliberate, approaching. The choirwoman's head snapped up, eyes wide. "That's not part of the rite," she whispered. "Stay here." She rose, robes billowing like smoke, and vanished into the shadows. The sound grew louder, closer. A steady rhythm, measured and inescapable, like the march of something ancient. And when the great doors of the basilica groaned open once more, I saw figures in gold armor step through the haze, silent, radiant, terrible. The custodians had come. The custodians' arrival turned the air to iron. I had seen them once before from afar, mere silhouettes framed by the towers of the sanctum, but distance had dulled the truth of their presence. Up close, they were something else entirely, too flawless to be called men, too terrifying to be gods. Their armor gleamed with a light that seemed to come from nowhere, gold hammered into sanctity by hands that had never known sin. Each step they took echoed like a judgment. The priests bowed low, trembling as the air rippled around them. Even the servitors faltered, their mechanical limbs momentarily freezing, as if the machine spirits themselves dared not move in such company. The custodian at the forefront halted before the bier. His spear was nearly twice his height, the blade shimmering with a faint energy that whispered like a voice trapped in static. He spoke not loudly but with a resonance that carried through the entire basilica. "The rite has been performed," he said. His tone was neither question nor command, merely a statement that expected no falsehood in return. The lead priest, still kneeling, dared to lift his head. "It is complete, honored custodian. His soul has been captured and sanctified, as decreed. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then the custodian turned his gaze toward the crystal vessel in the choirwoman's hands. "Bring it," he said. She obeyed, stepping forward with the careful reverence one might show carrying a newborn child made of glass. The sphere pulsed faintly, its glow now softer, almost docile, but I could still see movement within, shifting forms that resembled faces pressing against the inside, begging for release. The custodian accepted it without visible emotion. "His essence will be taken to the chamber of continuance," he said. "The Emperor requires all that remains faithful." He turned, and the others followed, forming a procession that moved like a slow-moving storm. The doors opened before them with the groaning of ancient hinges, and just like that, they were gone. The silence that followed was not peaceful, it was suffocating. The priests slowly rose to their feet, their faces pale and drained. One wept openly. Another collapsed where he stood, his body spent. The choirwoman did not move for a time. Then, at last, she turned to me. "You will leave now," she said. "The record must be sealed." I wanted to speak, to ask questions, but something in her eyes silenced me. I followed her out of the nave, through corridors that seemed narrower now, walls closing in with the weight of what I had just seen. The faint hum that had filled the basilica earlier still lingered, like a vibration deep in the bone. When we reached the antechamber, she stopped. "What you witnessed tonight," she said quietly, "you will not repeat. You will write the official report. You will omit details that are not sanctioned." "What details?" I asked, my voice little more than a whisper. "The soul, the light, what did they take?" Her expression did not change, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "They took what remains useful," she said. "The Emperor's will leaves nothing to waste." I left the basilica that night under the blood-hued glow of the pyre towers. The streets were empty, save for a few penitents crawling on their knees, muttering litanies into the dust. I walked quickly, clutching the data slate to my chest as if it could ward off the chill that had settled inside me. When I finally reached my hab unit, I did not sleep. I sat at my desk and stared at the blank report form for hours. My fingers hovered over the keys, but the words refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Holt's face, his mouth opening, the scream that wasn't a sound, the light that wasn't light. By dawn, I had written the official report. It was clean, precise, utterly devoid of meaning. I sealed it with my personal sigil and sent it through the sanctioned data channel. Then I sat back and stared at the wall until the alarm for the next work shift sounded. But I couldn't make myself go. Not yet. The following day, I noticed the surveillance cherubs outside my door. They hovered at the corridor's edge, wings fluttering silently, their porcelain faces blank except for the faint glow behind their eyes. They had always been there, I supposed, but now their presence felt pointed. Watching. Waiting. 3 days passed. I returned to my duties, filed records, stamped requisitions, approved maintenance cycles. Life resumed its mechanical rhythm as though nothing had changed. Yet the basilica lingered in my thoughts, its rituals replaying behind every mundane task. The phrase "chamber of continuance" echoed through my mind like a curse. On the 4th night, I received another summons. This one came not through official channels but slipped beneath my door on a folded sheet of parchment, the kind reserved for ecclesiarchal correspondence. It bore no seal, only a single line written in precise ink. "Attend the Basilica Mortis at the 20th hour. Bring no devices. Come alone." I told myself not to go, that nothing good could come from obeying an unsanctioned summons. But fear and curiosity are kin, and both ruled me by then. I arrived before the appointed hour, the basilica's gates already half open as though expecting me. Inside, the incense was thicker, the air darker. The choirwoman waited in the nave, standing beside the now empty sarcophagus. "You came," she said. "Good." "Why am I here?" I asked. "To see what comes after." From the shadows behind her, another figure stepped forward, a man clad in the plain robes of a lower adept. His face was gaunt, his scalp shaved save for a single strand of circuitry running from temple to jaw. He carried a small containment case of transparent adamantine. Inside was another crystal, dimmer than the one that had held Holt's soul, yet unmistakably similar. "This one did not settle," the choirwoman said softly. "Sometimes they linger too long. The Emperor accepts only those who yield. The others need guidance." The adept opened the case and a faint whine filled the chamber. The glow inside pulsed weakly like the last breath of a dying ember. "This was a navigator," he said, voice monotone. "Her mind burned out during translation. We extracted what remained." I took an involuntary step back. "Why show me this?" "Because you were chosen to record truth," the choirwoman replied. "And truth has layers. You saw the rite of capture. Now you will see the rite of dissolution." Before I could protest, the adept placed the crystal upon the sarcophagus and began to chant. His words were low, mechanical, drawn from a language I couldn't recognize. The sigils carved into the sarcophagus flared to life again, crawling like veins of molten metal. The crystal began to vibrate, its glow intensifying until it hurt to look at. And then came the same sound I had heard before, but this time closer, clearer. A cry not of pain, but of denial. The choirwoman raised her hands. "Yield," she whispered. "Accept the Emperor's light." The cry changed, grew frantic, splitting into overlapping voices that rose until it became unbearable. The air thickened. My vision blurred. For an instant I saw shapes within the light, memories perhaps, or echoes. A ship adrift in the void, a child crying on a deck, a man screaming as the warp swallowed him whole. The light shattered. Silence fell again. The crystal was gone, vaporized, leaving only a scorch mark on the sarcophagus. The adept slumped, blood trickling from his nose. The choirwoman lowered her hands. "It is done," she said. "The Emperor has accepted what he will." I wanted to speak, to ask what would happen to those who were not accepted, but she turned away, signaling the end of the discussion. When I left the basilica that night, the cherubs followed me again. This time, they did not keep their distance. One hovered close enough for me to see the tiny inscriptions along its wings. "Obedience is salvation." Another carried a small censer that clicked softly with each breath I took. I slept poorly. My dreams were filled with whispering voices and the smell of burning incense. I awoke with blood in my mouth, the taste sharp and metallic. My reflection in the lavatory mirror seemed unfamiliar, my eyes darker, older. I considered reporting the summons, but to whom? In the Imperium, reporting the wrong thing was as dangerous as doing the wrong thing. 2 nights later, while I worked late in the archive, a data feed flickered to life on my terminal, unprompted, unsanctioned. A single image appeared, the Basilica Mortis seen from above, its central spire glowing faintly red. Below the image were coordinates and a timestamp set for the next evening. I stared at it for a long time before realizing what it meant. Another funeral, another soul to be claimed, and somehow, despite everything, I knew I would go. The next evening, I found myself standing before the Basilica Mortis once more, the air colder, sharper, and tinged with a strange ozone scent that hadn't been there before. The pyre towers burned lower now, their flames dulled to amber cores that barely kept the dark at bay. I didn't remember walking all the way from the Hab district. My mind felt fogged, like I had moved through a dream. The coordinates from the data feed had led me here, but there had been no sender name, no seal, no authentication. Still, I was here. Perhaps I had always been meant to return. Inside, the basilica was quieter than I remembered. The incense had been replaced by something harsher, purifier chemicals, maybe, or sterilizers used for flesh reclamation. The choirwoman was not there this time. In her place stood 2 figures in white augmetic robes, faces obscured by rebreathers. They didn't speak as I entered. One of them made a subtle gesture toward the main hall, and I followed, unsure if I was invited or ordered. The sarcophagus from the previous rites had been moved aside. In its place stood something new, a translucent containment field humming faintly, and within it, a figure suspended upright by cables and metallic bands. He was still alive, or close enough to it. The tubes entering his body pulsed with thick, luminous fluid, seeping through his veins like molten glass. His eyes were open but filmed over, the irises glowing faintly blue. One of the robed attendants turned to me. His voice came filtered, mechanical. "Do you know who this is?" I shook my head. "He is Canonus Verdon's confessor," the attendant said, "found guilty of the sin of despair. He spoke against the Emperor's eternal vigilance." "I thought despair was a condition," I said carefully, "not a crime." "In the Imperium," the second attendant replied, "thought is action, and some thoughts decay worlds." They moved to a control station near the containment field and began to work the runes. The man inside twitched, the tube straining as though his body resisted the current running through him. I took a step forward, then stopped when I saw the golden sigil branded into his chest, a stylized aquila, glowing faintly as the current intensified. "This is not a funeral," I murmured. "No," said the first attendant, "this is preparation." The light around the confessor grew brighter, filling the containment field until his shape was barely visible. A low vibration filled the air, the same one I had felt deep in my skull during the previous rites. This time it didn't stop. The vibrations merged into words, a pattern of sounds that formed meaning not through language but through pressure, rhythm, intent. It was the Emperor's voice, but something that tried to imitate it. The confessor screamed or tried to. The sound came out as static, bursting through the containment field in broken bursts. His body convulsed, his hands clenching into fists, and for an instant his eyes cleared. They locked on mine and I froze. He mouthed something slow, deliberate. 3 words, "Do not record." Then his body arched violently. The golden sigil flared white-hot, searing his skin from within. His veins glowed, ruptured, and then light. A sudden, violent implosion that turned everything white. When my vision returned, he was gone. Nothing remained inside the containment field but ash suspended in air. The attendants didn't seem surprised. They simply powered down the machine, their movements routine, methodical. "The rite of correction is complete," said the first. "He has been purified." I didn't answer, my hands were shaking. "And his soul?" I asked finally. "Reclaimed," said the second without looking at me, "as are all things." They began cleaning the station, erasing any sign that a human being had existed there moments before. I backed away, heart pounding. I had seen death in the Imperium before, everyone had, but this was different. This wasn't a punishment, nor even a sacrifice. It was maintenance. I turned to leave, but another figure was waiting at the door. The choirwoman. Her expression was unreadable in the dim light. "You came back," she said. "You summoned me." She smiled faintly. "Did I? Perhaps, perhaps not. The Emperor guides all paths." "I saw what you did," I said. "That wasn't a funeral, that was erasure." "Every funeral is an erasure," she replied softly. "Do you think the soul that burns is the same that prays? The Imperium teaches remembrance, but it is built on forgetting." Her words chilled me more than the cold. "Why show me this?" "Because you are already part of it," she said. "Every record, every report, every sanctioned word, each one feeds the same machine. The only question left is whether you'll write truth or devotion." Before I could answer, the basilica's warning klaxons blared. The attendants froze. The choirwoman turned sharply, eyes narrowing. "They shouldn't be here yet," she whispered. "Who?" I asked, but the doors to the outer hall burst open before she could reply. A group of figures entered, inquisitorial stormtroopers in full carapace armor, bearing the red sigil of the Ordo Hereticus. Their leader, a tall man with a cybernetic jaw and pale augmetic eyes, strode forward. "By decree of the Inquisition," he declared, "this basilica is under audit." The choirwoman stepped forward, her hands raised in calm defiance. "You have no jurisdiction here. The ecclesiarchy answers to the High Lords, not to your paranoid crusades." The Inquisitor's eyes flickered with faint amusement. "We answer to the same throne, sister. Some of us merely see clearer than others." His gaze swept the room and then stopped on me. And who is this? Before I could speak, the choirwoman answered for me. A scribe, witness only. The inquisitor studied me for a long moment, then turned back to her. Then he will make a fine witness for the report. He gestured to his men. Search everything. Records, logs, soul archives. Leave nothing unsanctioned. The choirwoman's calm faltered for the first time. You'll desecrate the sanctum. He smiled faintly. There is no desecration where truth is concerned. As his men spread through the basilica, I felt the air shift again. The same low hum began beneath my feet, spreading through the stone. The choirwoman noticed too. Stop them, she cried, but the inquisitor ignored her. One of his men had begun tampering with the containment field's controls. The hum grew into a vibration, then into a sound, low, rising, furious. The basilica's walls trembled. The glass reliquaries lining the aisles began to crack. The lights dimmed, flickered, then turned crimson. Everyone out, the choirwoman shouted. Too late. The containment field split open with a deafening crack. A surge of light flooded the hall, not gold this time, but cold, blinding white. The figures within the reliquaries, the remnants of the captured souls, began to move. Their faces pressed against the glass, their mouths open in silent screams. The inquisitorial troops opened fire, but their last bolts passed through the apparitions like mist. The choirwoman grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the side corridor. They were not meant to be disturbed, she hissed. You brought them here. I didn't. You followed the signal, that was enough. We ran through the corridors, the wailing of trapped souls echoing behind us. The basilica was collapsing in on itself, the sacred machinery overloading under the weight of what had been unleashed. The air burned with static, the taste of metal and incense thick in my mouth. We burst into a side chapel, its walls covered in devotional engravings. The choirwoman slammed the heavy door behind us and sealed it with a ritual lock. They'll purge this place, she said, voice trembling for the first time. They always do. Purge what? The evidence of what they fear. She knelt before the altar and pressed her palm against a hidden panel. The floor shifted, revealing a narrow descent. Come, if you want to live. I hesitated, but the sound of collapsing stone behind the door made the choice for me. I followed her down. The tunnel was narrow, the air thick with dust and whispers. Faint light glimmered ahead, torches, or perhaps phosphor lamps. The passage opened into a vast underground chamber, far beneath the basilica. Rows upon rows of crystal sarcophagi stretched into the dark, each glowing faintly with inner light. The true funerals, the choirwoman said, her voice almost reverent. The ones no one above will ever see. I walked closer to one of the sarcophagi. Inside lay a figure, not dead, not alive, eyes closed, body still. The faintest flicker of breath misted the crystal. Who are they? I asked. The ones who refused, she said simply. The ones who would not yield their souls. I stared at the thousands of silent forms around us, an army of sleeping ghosts. You keep them here. I keep them safe, she replied, for now. From the Emperor. She turned to me, and for a moment I thought she might strike me, but her expression softened into something almost sad. From the Imperium, she said. The Emperor needs no protection from truth. His servants, however. Above us, the basilica roared as explosions shook the ground. Dust fell from the ceiling. Somewhere far above, the pyre towers collapsed and the flames were snuffed out. What happens now? I asked. Now, the choirwoman looked up, her face lit by the ghostly glow of the preserved souls. Now we bury the dead and the living who made them. Her hand closed over a switch embedded in the altar beside her. The chamber lights dimmed. All around us, the sarcophagi began to pulse, one by one, like a field of awakening stars. And in that moment I understood. The funerals of the Imperium were not endings. They were beginnings of something vast, buried, and very much alive beneath the surface of faith. The chamber beneath the basilica trembled as though the planet itself had drawn breath. Each sarcophagus pulsed faintly with that strange half-life, a low rhythm that synced with my own heart until I could no longer tell where my pulse ended and theirs began. The choirwoman, whose name I still did not know, moved among them like a shepherd tending her flock, her fingers tracing the runes etched into each crystal shell. "They'll come here next," she said quietly. "The Inquisition will burn this place clean." I followed her between the rows, trying to keep my voice steady. "Then why not leave?" Her gaze flicked toward the ceiling where faint booms echoed like distant thunder. "Leave," she repeated, as if testing the word. "And abandon them. Do you not understand what this is?" "I'm trying to," I admitted. "You said they refused. Refused what?" "The Emperor's call." The word struck with quiet force. "You mean they refused to be taken, to be consumed." Her tone was not bitter but filled with something harder, grief tempered into belief. "Every sanctioned funeral you've seen, every glorious ascension, is a lie built on obedience. They take what remains of a soul and turn it into fuel for machines, for saints, for the endless litany of death that keeps the Imperium running. But these," she gestured to the sleeping figures, "these are the ones who fought it, who clung to themselves." I stared into one of the sarcophagi. The figure inside was a young woman, her hands folded neatly across her chest, her face peaceful. The faint light under her skin pulsed slow and steady. She might have been sleeping. "What happens to them now?" "They wait," the choirwoman said, "until they can rise, until they can remember who they were." "Rise," I said, a chill creeping through my spine. "You mean resurrection?" She smiled faintly, though there was no joy in it. "No, not resurrection, remembrance." Before I could ask more, the tunnel behind us lit up with the pale flash of detonation. The ground shook. A shockwave rippled through the chamber, and dust cascaded from the vaulted ceiling like gray rain. Somewhere above, the Basilica Mortis was collapsing. "They've breached the sanctum," she said. "It's sooner than I thought." She moved swiftly, crossing to an altar embedded into the rock. Beneath its cracked marble surface were control runes, archaic, worn but still active. She began to chant softly in high Gothic, fingers brushing the sigils as they flared one by one. The light from the sarcophagi brightened in response, the entire chamber now alive with dim, pulsating radiance. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Hiding them," she said simply. "If they find this place, they'll shatter every one of these coffins, burn what's left of their souls and call it cleansing. I won't allow that." I took a step back as the air thickened with static. The stone beneath our feet began to hum. The sarcophagi's glow intensified until the whole cavern looked like the heart of a dying star. The choirwoman's chanting grew louder, faster. Then the far wall exploded inward. Shrapnel tore through the air. The roar of lasfire filled the chamber. Inquisitorial troops flooded through the breach, visors blazing red in the light. "By decree of the Ordo Hereticus," one shouted, "cease your heresy and surrender yourselves for purification." The choirwoman didn't stop. If anything, she raised her voice, her chant cutting through the gunfire like a blade. The sarcophagi began to shake, their surfaces rippling as the light within swelled to painful brightness. The soldiers hesitated, unsure whether to advance or flee. And then the first of the dead opened their eyes. A chorus of low moans filled the air, almost harmonic. The crystal shells cracked and fell away like brittle ice, and the figures within stepped forward, not alive, not dead, but caught somewhere between. Their movements were slow, almost gentle, but wherever they went, the air shimmered. The soldiers opened fire, but the bolts passed through them harmlessly. One trooper screamed as his weapon melted in his hands, his armor fusing to his flesh. Another turned his gun on himself before the phantom of a woman even touched him. The choirwoman stood amid the chaos, her arms outstretched, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the risen. "Remember," she whispered to them, "remember what was taken from you." The dead turned their faces upward, eyes glowing with faint inner light. They weren't attacking, not in the way I expected. They simply moved, brushing against walls, touching the stone, whispering words in voices too quiet to hear. The very air seemed to remember with them, and for a heartbeat I saw flashes, images burned into reality itself. Cities turned to ash, worlds lost to silence. 1,000 funerals, 1,000 lies. The Inquisitor himself stepped through the breach, flanked by his custodian escort. His presence made the air warp, even the light bent away from him. "This is blasphemy," he said, his voice calm, almost disappointed. "A mockery of divine order." The choirwoman turned to face him. "This is order, true order, the one your kind buried beneath 1,000 decrees." He raised his hand. "Then let us unbury it." The custodian beside him moved faster than thought, his guardian spear slicing through the air in a single perfect arc. It met the choirwoman's chest, lifting her from her feet. The sound that followed was not a scream but a breath, a long, soft exhalation, as though she had finally finished her song. She crumpled to the ground, her robes spreading like spilled ink. The dead froze. For a moment I thought they would fade, that her death had severed whatever strange bond kept them tethered. But instead, their eyes turned toward her fallen form. One by one, they began to kneel. The light from their bodies converged, flowing toward her like streams of molten glass. The Inquisitor stepped back, his augmetic eyes widening. "What is this?" I didn't know either. The choirwoman's body convulsed, her chest rising as if drawing breath for the first time. Her wounds closed, not with flesh but with light. When she stood, the glow beneath her skin had deepened into something fierce, something almost holy. Her eyes met mine, and for an instant I saw not one person but many, the reflections of all those she had tried to protect. "You shouldn't have come back," she said softly to me, to the Inquisitor, to all of us at once. The chamber erupted. Every sarcophagus that still held a sleeper shattered in unison. The air turned molten, shimmering with ghostly shapes. The soldiers screamed as their armor warped, and their visors burst from the heat of souls no longer contained. The custodian raised his spear, but the energy struck him before he could move. The golden armor cracked like porcelain, revealing the withered human form beneath. I fell to my knees, shielding my face. The heat wasn't physical, it burned deeper into thought and memory. For a second I saw everything she had shown me. The endless funerals, the souls siphoned and stored, the machinery of death that never slept. The Imperium fed on the dead because it could not sustain itself on faith alone. The Emperor did not demand sacrifice. His servants did. When the light dimmed, the chamber was silent. The Inquisitor lay motionless, his armor cracked open. The custodian was gone, only a smear of gold dust remained. The choirwoman stood amid the wreckage, her robe scorched but her eyes alive with an unnatural calm. "Are you going to kill me too?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She shook her head. "No, Kalen Voss, you'll do what you were chosen for." "What do you mean?" "You'll write it." I looked at the ruin around us, the shattered coffins, the flickering ghosts, the still body of the Inquisitor. "If I write this, they'll execute me." "They might," she said, "but they'll also read it." Another explosion echoed from above. The basilica was collapsing completely now. She stepped closer and pressed something into my hands, a small crystalline shard glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. "This is Holt," she said. "What remains of him, take it and go. If they catch you, burn it before they take you. If you reach the archives, place it in the vault marked Right Null. They'll know what it means." "What happens to you?" She smiled faintly. "I have my own funeral to attend." Before I could protest, she turned and walked toward the altar. The light around her grew brighter, and the last thing I heard before the tunnel caved in was her voice, whispering a single prayer, one not to the Emperor but to memory itself. I ran. The tunnels twisted for what felt like hours, each collapse behind me a closing chapter. I emerged finally into the cold night air of Terra's lower levels, gasping, the shard burning faintly in my pocket. Above, the sky glowed with fire where the Basilica Mortis had once stood. I looked up at the falling embers, ash, light, and memory all drifting together, and realized the truth of what I had witnessed. In the Imperium there are no funerals, only conversions. The living become functionaries, the dead become resources, and the faithful become dust. And yet beneath it all, something still remembers. When the upper hives burn, they do not burn with clean fire. The smoke of sanctified paper, incense, and burning promethium creates a haze so thick it can be mistaken for dawn. I stumbled through it, clutching the shard beneath my coat, the sound of sirens echoing like distant hymns. Terra has always smelled of ash, but that night it reeked of something else, truth exposed to air. I moved with the tide of evacuees pushing toward the transit lines, their faces gray and hollow, all of them murmuring prayers for a basilica they would never see again. A news drone buzzed overhead, broadcasting the official account: a containment breach, a malfunction in the basilica's reactor core. No mention of the choirwoman, of the dead that walked, of the custodian's golden armor shattering like glass. I watched the hollow eyes around me and understood they would never be told. The Imperium had already written its own funeral for the event, sealed and approved. Everything else was heresy. I found shelter in a disused habshaft near the Manufactorum district. Its walls sweated oil and the lights flickered in perpetual twilight. I sat on the cold floor, unwrapping the crystalline shard she had given me. It was smaller than my palm, cut with unnatural precision, pulsing with that faint rhythm I could feel behind my ribs. When I held it close, I could almost hear a whisper, not a voice but the memory of one. Holt. The worker I had watched ascend, his ashes scattered, his soul promised to the Emperor. He was still here, caught between remembrance and oblivion. "What do you want from me?" I asked, though I wasn't sure whether I spoke to the shard or to the ghosts of the basilica. The shard pulsed once in response, as if acknowledging that I was listening. I took out my slate and began to write. The words came unbidden, flowing like confession. The true purpose of the funerals, the heresy of remembrance, the choirwoman's rebellion. I wrote until my fingers cramped and my vision blurred, until the lines of text seemed to burn through the screen. Every keystroke felt like a betrayal, and yet a release. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was doing something that mattered. When the door burst open, I didn't even have time to hide. 3 figures in matte black armor filled the threshold, their helms shaped like the heads of carrion birds. They moved with silent precision, weapons raised but not firing. Behind them stepped a man I recognized immediately. Inquisitor Arcturus, scorched and limping, his armor patched crudely with golden fragments. He should have been dead. "You survived," I said, the words barely leaving my throat. "So did you," he replied, voice distorted through his helm's vox. "Which means we still have work to do." He gestured to the shard in my hands. "Hand it over." I hesitated. The shard pulsed again, faster, as though sensing danger. "You don't understand what this is," I said. "Oh, I do." He stepped closer, and the light from the shard danced across the ruined half of his face, revealing augmetic bone beneath charred flesh. "It's contraband, fragment of a heretical construct. You think I haven't seen the choir's work before." "You call it heresy," I said, "but all she wanted was to let them rest." "Rest?" he almost laughed. "There is no rest, not for the living, not for the dead. The Emperor does not permit such luxury. We are all fuel for his will." He reached for the shard. I backed away, pressing it against my chest. "If I give it to you, what happens?" "It will be destroyed," he said simply. "Return to the cycle, purified." "And if I refuse?" His gaze hardened. "Then you will join it." The troopers raised their weapons. The air thickened. I could taste the ozone of charged power cells. Then the shard flared, blinding white. For an instant, the room vanished. The troopers staggered, firing blind. I saw nothing but light and felt nothing but the pressure of memory flooding through me, images, thoughts, sensations that were not mine. Holt's life unspooled like film. The endless hours in the Manufactorum, the accident that had crushed his ribs, the days spent praying to a god who never answered, the fear of death, the moment of release as the flames took him. Then the horror of awakening again, trapped inside the crystal matrix, bound to the machine that powered the basilica's light. I gasped as if drowning. When the vision faded, the troopers were gone. The Inquisitor was on one knee, clutching his head, his augmetics sparking. The walls were scorched where the light had touched them. I staggered toward the exit, clutching the shard. "You can't stop it," I said. "They'll remember." Arcturus looked up, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. "You fool," he hissed. "You think you've freed them, you've awakened them." The lights overhead flickered. A low hum filled the air, not mechanical but organic, rising from the ground itself. I looked down and saw cracks spreading through the metal floor, light leaking from beneath like molten gold. "What did you do?" "The basilica was a seal," he said, "and you just broke it." The floor gave way. I fell into darkness. When I awoke, I was somewhere deep below the hives, where the heat of the planet's core pulsed like a dying heart. The air shimmered with energy, and the walls were not walls but veins of crystalline light. The shard had fused to my hand, its glow spreading under my skin like infection. I heard voices, thousands of them, whispering in harmony. "Kalen Voss." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It was Holtz and the choirwoman S and countless others layered atop one another. "You have opened the path." "What path?" I whispered. "The one that leads back to the beginning." The crystal veins around me pulsed, revealing shapes within, faces, hands, fragments of memory suspended like insects in amber. The dead of Terra, all stored, all contained, their essence harvested and fed into the machinery of faith. And now they were waking. Above me, I could feel the tremors of the surface as alarms sounded. The light from below surged upward, flowing through the cracks of the world like veins of molten glass. The dead were no longer content to be fuel. I tried to climb, but the walls shifted, reshaping themselves around me. I saw flashes, pilgrims collapsing mid-prayer as the candles on the altars flared to life, statues weeping light, servo-skulls dropping from the air as their machine spirits screamed. The shards buried across Terra were resonating, connecting, remembering. I reached a ledge that opened into a vast chamber, the true core of the basilica network. Towering pillars of crystal rose into infinity, each pulsing with the rhythm of countless hearts. And at its center stood a colossal figure of light and machinery, neither man nor god, suspended in chains of living data. The choirwoman's voice echoed in my skull. "This is what they call the Emperor's light. This is what we've been feeding." It was beautiful, terrible, infinite. The figure stirred and I fell to my knees, not in worship but in understanding. The Emperor was not alive. He was sustained, by memory, by death, by the endless funerals that fed the machinery of his myth. Each life extinguished became a flicker of power in his vast and broken form. And now, the system that sustained him was unraveling. The voices in my head grew louder. Some were screaming, others were laughing, and beneath them all one calm, steady pulse, Holtz. "You can end it," he said, "or you can let it consume you." "How?" I asked, though I already knew. The shard in my hand had become part of me. Its light pulsed with every heartbeat, syncing perfectly. To destroy it would mean to destroy myself. To keep it meant letting the chain of memory continue, unchecked. The Emperor's figure stirred again, a ripple of radiance spreading through the chamber. I felt it reach for me, pulling me toward that endless, devouring light. Somewhere above, I heard the echo of battle, the Inquisition trying to contain what they could no longer understand. I pressed my hand to the crystal floor, feeling the heat rise. "If there are to be funerals," I said softly, "let this be the last one." I drove the shard into the ground. The world ignited. Light flooded every crevice of the chamber, surging upward through the basilica ruins, through the hives, through the spires of Terra itself. For one blinding moment, every citizen of the Imperium saw, not visions of saints or salvation, but themselves. Every death they had ignored, every prayer unanswered, every soul forgotten. The truth burned through the fog of faith like sunrise through smoke. And then it was gone. When I opened my eyes, I was lying beneath a gray sky. The city above me was silent. No sirens, no hymns, just wind carrying the ash of 1,000 extinguished candles. The shard was gone. In its place, a faint mark burned into my palm, a sigil shaped like a broken aquila. I stood slowly. The streets were empty, but the air felt different, lighter, though I couldn't say why. Perhaps the dead had finally stopped whispering. Perhaps they were simply listening now. As I walked toward the distant spires, I thought of the choirwoman's words. All service serves a purpose. That doesn't mean we survive it. Maybe she had been right. Maybe this was what funerals were meant to be, not endings but reckonings. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No more hymnals droning from the basilica towers, no ceaseless hum of generator psalms keeping the city's veins alight. Terra's endless song of worship, the sound that had haunted my dreams since childhood, had simply ceased. It was as if the planet itself had drawn a breath and forgotten how to release it. I walked through the desolation where the basilica had once stood. The colossal spires had melted into jagged bones of crystal and metal, their upper reaches fused into shapes that looked disturbingly organic, like ribs thrust up from a corpse too vast to bury. The air shimmered with residual energy, casting fractured reflections across the blackened stone. No crowds now, no priests, only echoes. As I moved deeper into the ruins, I saw movement, a figure standing in the ash, motionless but for the slow turn of her head. For a moment, I thought it was the choirwoman returned, but it was. The figure's robe was that of a lowly acolyte, her face unscarred, her eyes wide and unfocused. She didn't seem to see me. She raised her hand, and I saw the faint glimmer of crystal beneath her skin. The mark, the same one that burned on my own palm. Then she began to speak, not to me, but to the air. "He hears us still," she murmured, "but he no longer speaks back." I wanted to ask what she meant, but the wind picked up suddenly, carrying with it a strange sound, like millions of whispers layered into one long exhale. The ash around us stirred, forming patterns that writhed like veins. I took a step back as a tremor passed beneath my feet. The ground was moving. When the quake subsided, the acolyte was gone. Only her footprints remained, glowing faintly before fading into nothing. I should have turned back then. I should have sought shelter, found survivors, anything but follow the pull that drew me deeper into the heart of the ruins. But something had awakened inside me, a curiosity I hadn't felt in years, something bordering on faith but not quite the same. The mark on my hand pulsed softly, like a heartbeat not entirely my own. The tunnels beneath the basilica were still intact, though half-collapsed in places. I followed their winding paths downward, my way lit only by the faint phosphorescence that seemed to seep from the very walls. The silence here wasn't empty. It was alive, filled with the echoes of things I couldn't see. And then I found them. Hundreds of them, people kneeling in perfect stillness, each with that same crystalline mark spreading across their faces and hands. Not dead, but not alive either. Their eyes were open, glowing faintly, their lips moving soundlessly in unison. The remnants of the choir, survivors of the blast, or something new entirely. As I approached, they all turned toward me at once, a single motion, unified, precise. One of them, a man I recognized from the archives, a scribe who had been buried weeks ago, spoke first. His voice was layered, distorted, like several speaking through one mouth. "You broke the chain, Kalen Voss." "I tried to end it," I said, "to free them." "You ended nothing, you freed us." Their collective gaze shifted upward, as if staring through the stone ceiling into the sky beyond. "He has been sustained by our deaths for millennia. Now he is sustained by our awareness. Do you understand what that means?" "No," I said, though part of me did. Awareness was power. Memory was energy. Every soul that remembered their own suffering fed the same machinery I had tried to destroy. The Emperor's light hadn't gone out, it had simply changed its source. They began to rise, the faint hum of their voices merging into a low vibration that shook the air. The walls trembled. The tunnels began to crack. "He stirs," they said together. "He listens." And then they stopped moving, all of them freezing mid-motion. The light in their eyes dimmed. I reached forward, touched the nearest one, and felt nothing. No pulse, no breath, no warmth. They had turned to stone. A sound echoed down the corridor behind me, a rhythmic thud, metallic and deliberate. I turned to see a custodian stride through the haze, his once golden armor now dulled to the color of old bone. His faceplate was shattered, revealing a human face beneath, pale and burned, eyes hollow. "Voss," he said, voice rasping, "you did this." "I tried to end it," I said again, though the words felt useless now. He raised his spear, its power field flickering weakly. "You woke the sleepers, you broke the silence. Do you know what that means?" "I know it means they're not gone," I said. "They were never gone." The custodian stepped closer, the light from the tunnel glinting off the fractures in his armor. "The Emperor's silence was mercy. Without it, they will all hear him, all at once." Before I could ask what that meant, he drove the spear into the ground. The tunnel exploded with light. For a heartbeat, I was weightless, surrounded by the sound of voices, millions, billions, shouting, praying, screaming. The light coalesced into a vision that burned itself into my skull. Terra seen from above, the hives flickering like dying embers. Across the galaxy, shrines and cathedrals pulsing in resonance with some unseen signal, pilgrims collapsing in ecstasy, astropaths screaming as their minds were flooded with impossible radiance. It was spreading, the awareness, the awakening. The chain I had broken had never been a prison. It had been a dam. When the vision faded, I was lying in a crater of glass and ash. The custodian was gone, melted into the wall, his armor fused into the crystal. I crawled out, my skin blistered and glowing faintly where the light had touched it. The mark on my hand had spread up my arm, veins of gold threading beneath my flesh. I emerged back into the open air. The sky above Terra was no longer gray. It shimmered with auroras of impossible color, vast rivers of energy flowing from the basilica ruins into the heavens. Ships in orbit burned as their machine spirits screamed. Vox transmissions dissolved into static prayer. And then, amid the chaos, I saw her. The choirwoman stood at the edge of the crater, her robe tattered, her body half-formed from crystal and flame. She looked at me with eyes that were no longer human. "You should not have come back," she said softly. "You died," I whispered. "We all did," she replied. "Some of us just haven't realized it yet." She reached out, brushing her hand against mine. The mark on my skin flared, and I saw glimpses, worlds burning, faith shattering, truth spreading like infection. "The Emperor is not a god of mercy," she said. "He is a god of continuance. Even in ruin, he endures." "What happens now?" "That depends on you." She turned her gaze skyward. "The Imperium has survived every heresy, every war, every death. But this is different. You didn't destroy faith. You made it conscious. You gave it teeth." Lightning arced across the sky, striking the basilica's remains. The ground trembled again, and from the fissures rose a sound that was not of this world, a choir of billions, singing not in devotion but in defiance. The choirwoman began to dissolve, her body scattering into motes of light that drifted upward to join the storm. Her final words echoed as she vanished. "Every funeral feeds the Emperor. Every remembrance rebuilds him. You've only changed the shape of his hunger." I fell to my knees, covering my ears, though it did nothing to block the noise. The song filled everything, the sky, the stone, the marrow in my bones. The dead were singing, not as mourners, but as participants in a new, terrible liturgy. I screamed for it to stop. And in that moment it did. The silence returned, heavier than before. I opened my eyes to find myself standing alone. The city was still, the sky clear. No auroras, no ash, just the faint scent of burnt incense carried on the wind. The mark on my hand was gone. But as I turned, I saw movement in the distance, a column of figures in black, walking through the ruins with deliberate calm. At their head walked Inquisitor Arcturus, his armor now gleaming, his face restored, though his eyes burned with something far older than life. He stopped a few paces away and smiled faintly. "Congratulations, Voss," he said. "You've done what none of us could. You've made him aware again." I stepped back. "He's awake." "Not awake," he said, looking skyward, "but listening, always listening." "What happens now?" He regarded me for a long moment. "Now," he raised his hand, showing the same mark that had once burned on my palm. "Now the funerals begin again, on every world, for everyone." He turned away, his voice drifting behind him like a benediction. "The Emperor remembers." I stood there long after they vanished, the ruins bathed in faint morning light. I didn't know whether to feel relief or dread, perhaps both, because in that stillness beneath the silence I could still hear it, the faint hum of memory, the sound of a universe learning to grieve itself. And for the first time, I understood what funerals in the Imperium truly meant. They were not endings, they were the maintenance of eternity. The dead do not rest, they resonate. Morning never truly came to Terra anymore. The sun was hidden behind layers of dust, and the shroud of light that still pulsed faintly above the ruins of the basilica. But something like dawn filtered through the haze, a pale imitation, soft and sterile, illuminating a world that had forgotten what true daylight looked like. I walked through streets where every step stirred ash into thin spirals. Statues had cracked, toppled, or fused into unrecognizable masses of stone and bone. The banners of the ecclesiarchy still hung in tatters, fluttering weakly as if unsure of their own meaning. The people who survived wandered aimlessly, their eyes hollow but strangely calm, as if they had seen something too vast to ever describe. And maybe they had. I hadn't slept since the awakening. My body didn't feel tired anymore, just emptied, like every nerve had been stretched to its limit and then left to hum in silence. The mark that had burned on my skin was gone, but I could still feel it beneath the surface, thrumming faintly whenever I stood too close to the basilica ruins. It wasn't gone. None of it was. At first, the administratum tried to reassert control. Vox transmissions crackled with orders, proclamations, revised catechisms meant to restore order and redefine the event. They called it the Great Reflection. The High Lords insisted the Emperor had revealed his mercy through flame, that the light over Terra had been a divine reminder of his eternal vigilance. The people, starved for meaning, clung to the lie. But others didn't. In the lower hives, the dead no longer rotted. Their bodies crystallized, thin veins of golden light threading through flesh, their eyes glowing faintly even as they lay still. The priests who came to burn them found their torches extinguished by unseen hands. In Manufactoria, workers began to murmur prayers to the remembered emperor, a name the ecclesiarchy quickly banned. And still the hum persisted. I found myself drawn again and again to the ruins. The air there was warmer, thicker with the scent of incense and ozone. It was where the hum felt loudest, where the light beneath the ground still flickered like a heartbeat. I told myself I was going there to record, to observe, to bear witness, but deep down I knew it was something else, a need to understand. On the third day, I found the custodian again. He stood among the ruins, armor pitted and darkened, his helm hanging from one hand. He was human now, or close enough to it, his golden hair streaked with ash, his eyes no longer radiant but sunken and weary. He looked at me without surprise, as though he had been expecting me. "Voss," he said quietly, "you should not be here." "Neither should you." He smiled faintly. "Perhaps not, but this is where we were meant to end." He knelt and traced a line in the ash with his gauntleted finger. It glowed faintly, forming the shape of an aquila split clean down the middle. "Do you know what happens when a god becomes aware of its own worship?" I shook my head. "It begins to doubt," he said, "and doubt is the seed of hunger." He stood again, the motion slow, almost painful. The Emperor's light was never infinite, Voss. It was sustained by ignorance, by faith unexamined. You tore that veil away. Now he sees the truth of his empire, the rot beneath the hymns. "Then why do they still pray?" I asked. "Why do they still believe?" "Because belief is easier than change." He looked toward the horizon where the spires of the upper hive still shimmered faintly. "They will sing louder now, build new cathedrals, call this an age of renewal, but the Emperor is not blind anymore. He feels every word, every lie." His expression hardened, and he hungers. A gust of wind scattered the ash between us, revealing the outlines of countless footprints beneath, some human, some not. The earth itself seemed restless, trembling faintly beneath our feet. "What will happen?" I asked. He looked at me with a gaze that carried centuries of weight. "Funerals, Voss, the kind you cannot imagine." He turned and walked away, his figure fading into the haze. I didn't follow. I couldn't. Something in his words rooted me where I stood. That night I couldn't stay in the city. The dreams had returned, visions of lightless halls filled with silent watchers, the sound of millions of hearts beating in unison beneath the soil. I left before dawn, heading into the wastelands beyond the hive walls, where the air still shimmered faintly from the aftermath of the explosion. I don't know how long I walked. Hours, maybe days. The stars were strange now, dimmed, shifting. I saw patterns among them that hadn't existed before, constellations forming and unforming like thoughts. I wondered how many other worlds were feeling the same awakening, how far the Emperor's awareness stretched. Eventually, I reached the edge of a great crater. It was deeper than any I had seen, a wound in the planet's skin that seemed to pulse faintly from below. And there, at its center, stood a single figure wrapped in white. I knew her instantly. The choirwoman. Her form was no longer fractured. The light that had consumed her was subdued now, focused, steady. She turned as I approached, her eyes luminous but not blinding. "You came," she said. "I had to." She smiled faintly. "You always do." I stopped a few paces away. "What is this place?" "The grave," she said simply. "The one you helped dig." I looked down into the crater. Beneath the thin layer of ash, I could see veins of light threading through the soil, thousands of them, connecting, pulsing, alive. "The dead," I whispered. "Yes, but not as you knew them. They've become something else. A network of remembrance. Every life the Imperium has ever taken, every prayer ever whispered, they're all here now. Not gone, just changed." She stepped closer, her voice soft but unwavering. "Do you know what the Emperor is, Voss, truly is?" I didn't answer. He was a man once. A man who bore the weight of humanity's future and drowned in it. But gods are not born, they're built. And the Imperium built him from every death, every faith, every act of devotion or cruelty ever committed in his name. He became the reflection of humanity itself. She looked out over the horizon, where the faint glow of the ruined hive shimmered. "But when you shattered the basilica, you broke the separation between God and man. Now the reflection sees itself." "And what does it see?" I asked. She turned back to me, her expression almost tender. "Us." For a long moment there was only the wind, whispering through the bones of the ruined world. Then she reached into her robe and withdrew something small, a crystal shard, identical to the one I had destroyed. Its light was dim, almost gentle. "You thought you ended it," she said. "But endings are just invitations. This is yours." I hesitated. "What happens if I take it?" "Then you'll understand what funerals are really for." The shard pulsed softly, reflecting in her eyes. "And if I refuse?" She smiled. "Then you'll keep walking, pretending you haven't already chosen." I took it. The moment my fingers closed around the shard, the world fell away. The air vanished, the ground dissolved, and I was standing in darkness filled with voices, not shouting, not singing, just speaking. Millions of them, all whispering the same phrase over and over: "We remember." I saw Terra as it once was, lush, alive, hopeful. I saw the first wars, the first shrines, the birth of faith. I saw the Emperor rise not as a god but as a man with too many faces. I saw his death on the golden throne, endless and incomplete, stretched across time like a wound that never healed. And then I saw the funerals. Not the grand ones, not the processions in cathedrals, but the small ones, the kind no record ever kept. A mother whispering over her dead child in a hive gutter, a guardsman burying his comrade in the dust of some nameless world, a mechanicus adept dismantling a broken servitor with reverence. Every act of farewell, every tear shed, every whispered prayer, they all fed the same current, not of sorrow but of persistence. The emperor did not live because he was worshipped. He lived because humanity refused to stop remembering. When I opened my eyes, the choir woman was gone. The crater was empty. The shard had vanished from my hand, leaving behind a faint warmth that spread through my chest. The hum was gone too. Only the faint beating of my own heart remained. I looked up at the sky. The auroras were gone, replaced by cold stars, steady and indifferent. But for the first time they looked beautiful to me, not as symbols, not as signs, but as themselves. I realized then that funerals in the Imperium were never meant to end anything. They were the ritual of endurance, the quiet defiance of extinction. Each one said, "We're still here. We still remember." I began to walk back toward the city, unsure of what waited for me there. Perhaps the ecclesiarchy would rebuild. Perhaps the Inquisition would hunt me. Perhaps nothing at all. But I would go because someone had to remember how it had begun. As I reached the edge of the ruins, I looked back one last time. The wind stirred the ash into a spiral, and for a moment I thought I heard a voice, faint, distant, almost kind. "Kalen Voss," it said, "light a candle when you return. That's all the Emperor ever wanted." I smiled despite myself. And somewhere deep beneath the earth, the dead of Terra hummed softly, their voices neither mournful nor joyful, just steady, like the turning of the stars. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, even gods are mourned. And that, I finally understood, was what funerals in Warhammer 40,000 were truly like.